I
Right.
don't see group participants, so should we get started?
Yes, please get started.
Okay, hi. All you need is PageRank. As metapopulation model is done, we dive into the topology of commuter flows between geographies. And here's a brief overview of problems addressed in this journey. We have an aggregated months of intercity commutes between Russian cities. Flights, trains, buses. It makes a graph of nearly 1K nodes connected by 20K weighted edges. First thing to do was an implementation of that metapopulation model. Each city is treated separately, plus we consider traffic flows. Here is a link to GitHub we have shared a few weeks ago. Moving on. Next question is funnier. Which city has the biggest impact on dynamics? And here you see Russia and its railroad network. In case it is the only city, PageRank is all you need. As we want to find several cities to maximize spread, the question is trickier. This problem is NP-complete, and good news is there are good approximations. So we use this recent stop and stare algorithm and find suboptimal places to control or block. Next, we look at higher order structures, motifs. We know that in nature, there are recurring patterns of interaction. We also know these patterns are not random. For example, there are certain possible directed structures of 3 nodes. And test for this non-random nature is simple. We count motifs, rewire this original network so that nodes preserve their degrees, and count motifs once again. Randomize many times, and get expected frequencies of structures to appear at random. Next important property of networks is structural roles. Nodes are embedded differently. So we make a count of motifs around every node and use those counts as feature vectors. This is how Moscow is embedded into the network of all transport. For every node, we look at neighborhood. We define neighborhood, and then we combine features of those neighbors. First is we do so linearly, and this makes Rolex algorithm. If we do so non-linearly, it makes a graph neural network. In order to check the compactness hypothesis, we first project those multidimensional feature vectors into 2-dimensional space with TSNY algorithm. And we also run k-means in order to identify the number of structural roles. Those clusters are reasonable. For example, Moscow falls into a cluster of 1. 2 major cities, St. Petersburg and Yekaterinburg, go together and so on. Does it make sense? We plot it on geographical layout, and it seems reasonable, at least this string of violet colored nodes in the bottom. It goes along the Trans-Siberian Railway, which suggests they are kind of transport hubs for local communities. The disadvantage of Rolex is that every aggregation doubles the size of feature vector. Yep, it's the same story of exponential growth. So we go for graph neural networks that make better features of smaller size. At least we know that in graph-related machine learning problems, these outperform everything. And as a reminder, a graph neural network is very similar to that Rolex algorithm. It is just a couple of layer weights and a nonlinear activation on top of all that. Our ultimate goal is to be able to compare topology between countries and regions. And we do so by use of Weisfeiler-Lehmann isomorphism test. Ironically, this super novel graph neural networks implement a 50-something-year-old algorithm of space exploration era. It works the following way. We color nodes with different colors, and those feature vectors, you can treat them as unique color codes. This algorithm combines colors of nodes into a color of a graph. And by comparing those resulting embeddings, we reason about whether or not two graphs are alike. And if those graphs are not alike, we have different embeddings. And it works quite simply, just multi-layer perceptron and a global pooling of nodes. This project has a side quest. Let's get it squared. Medics are today's rock stars working the front line. Michael Jordan said, talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships. I can hardly find examples of more regulated jobs. These days, they experience major disruption of everything. Normal organization structure were meant for normal times. Things have changed. Organizations restructure in order to respond to increased demand. It's pure luck that many medical workers have several specializations and can jumpstart into action. We tested similarity measures for unsupervised settings. Dialectic method states these can measure structural differences as well. If things are not similar, they are different. So this change of structure makes people suffer. And there is one major question: who is going to break down? And it seems it's not medics who are going to break down first. I put these two issues together as we all have reached a point when realities collide. Let's move to the questions.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat, which is, what are some of the features you would envision using in this model?
So far, we implemented completely unsupervised settings. So we do not use any features like population number or city, intercity features. We just look at topological structure of commute patterns, but we can do things like binning of city population. So we have extra variables to convolve. We just, the more information we put into the model, the richer representations we get. Other countries, it is ubiquitously applicable to any geography. It is just we have Russian data. It is disaster getting data. We got Russian commutes from a company, a private company that sells tickets, and they have just outsourced this data set facing pandemic. I'm desperately trying to get more data with little success.
Thank you. That was a great start. Thank you. How about some virtual applause if we could? And let's get ready for our next presentation. Tyler, can you share your screen?
Thanks.
Yes, I can. All right. Can you see that? I think I
Yes. And I am unmuting people who are raising their hands, who want to be part of this. Tyler, you also have the ability to unmute people if you want to unmute any group members. So raise your hand if you're in this group, and there we go.
think so.
Get everybody?
I think we're good. Yeah.
Why don't you take us away?
Hi, I'm Ariella. Our group is called EpiNet Fundamentals, and we set out to create a poster that could be hung in the workplaces of public health professionals to give them background on network epidemiology. So the motivation for making our poster is that as scientific professionals, we know how much work goes into effective scientific communication. To talk about our individual contributions to a field, we often feel the need to lay out lots of preparatory discussion, saying this is what everyone else did, and then this is what I've done to contribute. So we also know that many public health professionals that are combating COVID-19 don't have the time to take this course, even though network epidemiology is really beneficial to the work they're doing. And so we are proposing a visually engaging, accessible poster to be put in these public health professionals' workplaces to give them the intuitions that network modeling yields in an applicable way.
So the first part of the poster is to give the audience some basic concepts. So network epidemiology provides us with better information on how to curb the spread of infectious disease by taking into account the effect of social interactions. So one of the key assumptions of network model is how people behave towards each other. In science, we often simplify a real-life event with models. For example, we can use an analogy with fire trials to understand the spread and the control of zoonotic disease such as COVID-19. By disrupting one of the three key components, including population density, social behaviors, and multi-species interface, we can control the spread of the disease. So at the bottom of the poster is a typical form of model that network epidemiology uses, with nodes as people and edges as connection among the population. We can see that it is clear from the graph how the cases increase in a specific network as time goes by. So now Tyler is going to talk about the math behind network epidemiology.
Yeah, so in the middle section here, we decided to introduce at a very fundamental level some of the math that goes behind compartmental models and network epidemiology. We chose to introduce as a model the SEIR model with an extra exposed compartment and an ability, sort of an ephemeral immunity. So individuals in the removed can go back to the susceptible category over time. And we decided to show here a plot that shows the limited immunity and essentially the disease persisting to equilibrium here. It was a really tough choice in this section to add more models and figures or to balance that with like increased explanation. And it was very challenging to make this part as interesting as possible and as gripping as possible and sort of cover the math up in a way that doesn't conceal too much behind it. We made the figures with Matplotlib and NumPy, and sort of to combat what I was saying about the hiding of the sort of the interestingness of network epidemiology. We may in a future iteration of this might want to add a section where they can go for more references. But in general, this section should lead to sort of some takeaways for the people seeing the poster, such as, you know, this stuff is well-founded in mathematical and scientific literature. It leads to good results, and like you can get information out of it. And then for the last section, we wanted to discuss some decision making. So for the public health professional, you know, who's going to maybe not be interacting and running these models all the time, they're going to be instead looking at these models. It's important for them to know what they can take out of them. And we did just hear Sam Scarpino tear R naught to shreds, but sort of the reason we need to present it here is the same reason why we don't teach quantum mechanics in high school. You have to have intuition built up before it can be broken down. So we did think it was important to, despite all of R naught's flaws, keep it on the poster so that any public health professional that's seeing this that doesn't have that same level of background knowledge will be able to gain the intuition that they would have otherwise. In the plots here, we made the decision to simplify from SEIR to SIR models, to simplify the equations and change it a little bit so that it's easier to comprehend and easier to show this change here. To really visualize the impacts that a public health professional can have on the spread of a disease, we implemented a model that's a sort of variant of the SIR model, where after a certain amount of time, the rates change. So right about here, R naught goes from being above 1 and creating an epidemic, as shown in this plot, to being below 1 and causing everything to stabilize. And so this is simulating the effects of some policy shift that changes the way that people and governments reacted to spread. And so then we're going to next talk to Rory about about the design choices.
Yeah, so we came from a large overall group that came with a lot of different backgrounds, people with strong experience in public health, people with strong experience in mathematics, but I think the unifying factor here was a kind of curiosity and a willingness to sort of share and broadcast out the deep insights that we were generating here. So as Tyler just mentioned about that R-naught shifting before and after a quarantine occurs, you know, that to our ears was a great reminder of what we gleaned from one of Laurent's presentation in the first week about R-naught being not just a factor of the pathogen, but of the population as well. So you know, we as populations have some agency around controlling what R-naught can be. If we could zoom into the fire triad again, that was another intuition, another kind of notion that was taken from YY's lecture, where he described population density as the fuel that can spread a pandemic. But it's also important to know that we can disrupt any aspect of that fire triad. We can disrupt the social behaviors that we normally have by staying inside. We might be able to disrupt the sparks around that by being more mindful about the ways in which the zoonotic diseases can spread from wild animals that are in close contact with human populations. That's not to say we need to get rid of modern agriculture, or we need to get rid of wet markets or whatever, but there's a way to approach this question as public health professionals with a little bit more intelligence. So in closing, to think about that design as being useful, visually engaging, punchy, easily readable, you know, I want to return to a point that Tyler made, that, you know, you need your intuitions built up in order to knock them down again. We see this as being, you know, an introduction to the topic, but one that actually really provides a springboard into the deeper questions. So it's a mark of sophistication in that sense, to understand the limits of the more basic, you know, non-quantum mechanics in Tyler's example, depiction of how network epidemiology works. I'm going to pass it over to Octavio.
Hi. So one of the things that so I'm going to talk about the, you know, where we would envision this going in the future. And one of the things that we had chatted about as a group was to make a series of posters. And you know, after listening to this past lecture, one of the ideas that really just popped up for me is that
a quick interjection here. You have just 2 minutes before we have to switch over to the next presentation, just to remind you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was thinking if we could tailor this to specific areas to get more groups of people, you know, from different backgrounds, educationally and otherwise, that might be a really great way to pique people's interest about network epidemiology in general, and maybe think about the ways that they could use their expertise in you know, the future of network epidemiology. And that's it.
Thanks. Thanks to our second group. A round of applause for you guys. Somehow my reaction button isn't working, but thank you very much. Quite ambitious to reach such a broad community with something kind of technical. If we have, why don't we start the others screen sharing, but I have a quick question for you guys. Do you feel like you're done because it looks pretty polished, or are you going to be working in the meantime between now and the end?
I think it looks polished, but there are still like a number of things that we can do to tweak it, and some, you know, minor adjustments and maybe major decisions that could be made to for clarity's sake. One of the things we tried to emphasize during the production of this was that everyone has very different schedules and very different time commitments and abilities. So not sure about whether or not those will get implemented, but we did have a lot of very fulfilling discussion throughout the production of the project regarding the, you know, what could we do? What would we have done?
Well, thank you. Sorry to cut you off. I'm trying to keep time here. It's a little challenging. If you want to be unmuted for the next group, please raise your hand. Angela, your co-host, you can also do some unmuting. Thanks again to our network epidemiology group for public health. And you guys can take it away when you're ready.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. We're going to expose our topic called transmission model and COVID-19 variants. Our team is composed by Saide Mohammadi, Sina Ghafouri, Concepcion Gamboa Sanchez, Amira Shane Pilevarian, and Fatime Pakpour. Okay, I'm going to start. So in March 2020, the group of research composed by Foster and colleagues performed a phylogenetic network analysis comparing the genomes of different samples taken in different parts of the world. So they found different differences in the genomes, and they found out that there were 3 variants of coronavirus SARS-CoV-2. Type A, that is the closest to the coronavirus mother. However, it has 2 mutations. Type B, which has another 2 mutations that has been spread in most of the countries around the world. And type C, which is the daughter of type B and has 1 mutation, different 2% variation. It is spread in Europe via Singapore. For that reason, the aim of this project is to find a correlation between intrinsic characteristics of COVID-19 and the differences of the structure of transmission model of various countries. As we know, coronaviruses belong to the Coronaviridae family in the Nidovirales order. COVID-19 emerged recently as a highly transmittable and pathogenic viral infection closely related to coronavirus SARS. However, although these strains have different mutations, they do not recall in the spike protein. They are, as a matter of fact, part of the structural proteins and non-structural proteins. For that reason, we believe that these mutations can make an influence in the spread of the virus and in this behavior of this virus. To prevent and implement effective treatment strategies for disease, knowing the origin and transmission mechanisms is very important.
We gathered the data of infected individuals from different countries, which included their age, gender, region, and the date they were reported as infected. In the transmission graph, the individuals who are infected are the nodes, and directed edges indicate which node infected which. Obviously, we don't have this information. Therefore, we came up with this algorithm to make a random graph. Here it is assumed that after a person is reported as infected, they would be quarantined and unable to infect others. But before that, there is an infection date which we guessed by creating a random distribution from 2 to 14 days with mod of 5 to indicate how many days before the reported date one individual can infect the others. Now let's say A as a spreader and B as a susceptible are randomly paired, and B's reported date lies in the incubation period for A. A will infect B, and the 2 nodes will connect. If the infection date of the susceptible doesn't lie in the incubation period of the spreader, they won't connect, like A and C. Now, what if they are not in the same region? Think about A and D. The dates match up, but they live in 2 different regions. For this case, we came up with this probability called P of CT. Then a random number between 0 and 1 is generated. And if it is smaller than P, we conclude A infects D. This means people from different regions have slimmer chance of infecting each other. We keep choosing random pair nodes until every node has an incoming degree of 1 and only 1, assuming no one can get infected twice.
We ran this algorithm for multiple countries. The transmission, Japan, and Indonesia are shown here. Structural properties for each network is demonstrated. Information like network size, modularity, number of clusters, average of outgoing degrees, and BC, which here stands for betweenness centrality, meaning the number of times a node is in the way of two nodes' shortest path. About 40% of the nodes have betweenness centrality of 0 and 0.1% have a very high betweenness centrality. This behavior is seen in all of the networks shown here. You can see that there is no significant difference except clearly the network size in the structural properties. These countries are believed to have been infected with variant B of COVID-19. Here, the graph for Italy is illustrated. The structural properties are not noticeably different, and betweenness centrality follows the same behavior, even though type C of COVID-19 was detected in Italy. So far, we have not seen a change of behavior in our transmission model. However, to be able to make a scientific conclusion, we need more data from different countries with a specified variant of the virus, which has not been easy to find because not a lot of countries have detected the variant of the virus, and in some others, more than one variant is spreading. On the other hand, by examining this graph, we made a different hypothesis, given the fact that only a few nodes in every network have disproportionately high betweenness centrality. By removing them, meaning immunizing them, we are suggesting two things. Either the size of the network would get smaller, or the time of the transmission would get prolonged because the shortest path of some nodes would get longer. This, while not related to the purpose of this project, can be the start of a new project of its own. But what can we do for the next step in this project? Besides trying to gather more data and model the transmission for more countries to reach a concrete conclusion, we can find the associativity of nodes with gender and age to find out which age group is more likely to infect which age group, and the same goes with gender. Also, we can use more sophisticated graphs like multi-layer graphs, or use age and gender in other graphs to study them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
My apologies there. There was an unmuting problem. Fatima was supposed to be unmuted. Sorry about that. There was a question that asks, do you think one virus is more virulent than the other?
That's,
we don't know that yet. Sorry. As a matter of fact, all our research in the literature do not have many, there are not many studies about this. What we found is that all these mutations fall into 4 places in the virus genome. However, as we noticed, these mutations are kind of synonymous mutations, which means that they do not alter the protein structure nor the function. But the strain B has a synonymous mutation, has a non-synonymous mutation. However, we don't know exactly if this is going to affect the virulence of the virus.
Thank you. And a round of virtual applause for you guys. We look forward to your next steps. For the next presentation, if you could raise your hand if you want to be unmuted. Again, I apologize to the last group for the unmuting problems. I thought I had caught them all. And the next screen sharer, please feel free to start sharing your screen. And I'm doing unmuting. And Ismail, you're also able to unmute people, just so you know. Okay.
All right.
All right. So when you're ready, you can share your screen.
Yes.
Great. It's working for me.
Doing that. And I think everyone can see this.
Yes.
All right. I'll jump right in. Hello, everyone. So our project is on looking at a metapopulation SIR, a simple metapopulation SIR model from the perspective of optimal control theory. And the end result we are looking for is we would like to look at some of the adversarial or cooperative effects we might see with centralized and decentralized control. And with that.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Tyson. So as Ismail said, we are looking at a metapopulation model. And this model is designed to incorporate spatial heterogeneity, in particular, how some regions are more dense and some are more rural, and also travel between these different areas. So Sam Scarpino gave an excellent talk describing the importance of this metapopulation structure on the intensity of the COVID outbreak. So we kind of wanted to investigate that. Our objective is to look at how control efforts impact the spread of an epidemic in this metapopulation model. And we want to use simulations simulations and analytical methods from optimal control theory to find the optimal control. Okay, next. So the model we look at is extending the SIR model to a metapopulation model. It essentially looks the same with a bunch of subscripts on all our variables, but these sums on the very right describe the travel between different patches or cities or whatever they might represent. We note that now with this metapopulation model, the population size of a particular patch is not necessarily constant in time. And the population size here is just NI. And then we have these parameters, beta I, gamma I, which are just the normal infection and recovery rates, and they may depend on the city or the patch. And then the mu ij is the standard travel rate between different patches. And then we have these control variables, which are the most interesting to us. And these describe control efforts. So alpha I describes maybe restrictions on the infection rate, for example, social distancing. And then rho ij, sigma ij, and tau ij represent restrictions on travel. And we note that there are a lot of parameters here. So one thing we do in our simulation is just restrict ourselves to 2 patches. Okay, next.
So we have some simple simulation results here with parameters that are handpicked to show some interesting scenarios. The first situation we are looking at is when there is no travel and all the patches are independent. And I think everyone has seen enough of these figures to this point. This is just regular SIR model. So the next situation we look at is we add an intervention, and intervention kicks in when there are more than 2,000 infected people, and it increases the social distancing to reduce the infection rate by 1/3, and we can see that the effect of that reducing, and after 50 times steps the intervention is cancelled, but it's still, if we say this line is a hypothetical capacity line, it helps keep it under the capacity, and essentially what's been being talked about flattening the curve. And this is without inter-travel and with an intervention. So the intervention essentially works. But if we include travel, with this intervention, then the city that is not doing any interventions essentially mostly ruining the work of the city that is doing very strict intervention. But another way to look at this is the city with strict intervention is actually improving the results of the city without any intervention. And we can see that from total results too. So what's interesting here is that it is possible to control in a metapopulation model, it is possible to control cities that are not cooperating through cities that are cooperating. And this opens a lot of possibilities for differential games and so on. So I will move to the next slide.
So in this slide, I will talk about how to evaluate the results via different control functionals. So imagine we impose different control. What does it mean? It means that the parameters in the SIR model will change, right? So how do we choose those parameters or control to obtain the curves that we want? And so looking at the curves, SIR curves that Ismail showed, we might want to optimize several quantities. For example, in this slide, let's call XT. So there's a SIR for different patches. There are M patches here. And then we might want to look at the first time when the number of infected people in a certain patch J reaches a catastrophe level alpha, right? So we don't want probably patch J to reach level alpha, or the infected people to reach alpha. And this first time is quantified by the following formula, the infimum, the smallest time where I is bigger than alpha. And so we might want to maximize this quantity, right? Or, so here we call it the collapse time for patch J. Another example, let's call it example 1B because it's related to the previous one, is that we might want to maximize the shortest collapse time. So we don't want any cities to collapse. And so there's another quantity that we might want to optimize based on choosing suitably the parameters or the control. The second example is the eradication time for patch J, right? This is the time when the number of infected people in patch J is less than alpha forever. Thereafter. So we want to maybe shorten the time now. So we want to minimize the eradication time for patch J, for example. Or in example 2B, we might want to minimize the eradication time for the entire disease, for all populations, right? The third example is the number of people who never get infected. So it is the sum of all the susceptible people. We want to maximize this. And then in the next slide, in the example 4, we might have a combination of two different effects. The first sum correspond to the total people who got sick, and the second sum, summation alpha ISI, is the total loss in the labor due to lockdown measure, for example. And the parameter lambda in between tunes the importance between these two effects. And there are many other.
You know, we have less than 2 minutes before we have to start the next presentation.
Thank you. So I think I will stop here for the examples. And the next slides, Christian will talk about how to get optimal control. We cannot hear you, Christian.
Christian is unmuted, but we're not hearing anything. Perhaps another one of the group members can make a few summary comments before we have to move on to the next presentation. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I know how frustrating it is.
Okay, I can go in. I'm not as familiar as Christian, on this, but essentially we want to find the optimal control for the functional we talked about and the system we talked about, and the way we plan to do that is through differential control. And as I also talked about, the interaction between different patches makes this problem non-trivial, and the difficulty is that there are essentially joint effects. Probably Christian could have done a better job, but I guess we'll have to stop here. Thank you for everyone. If you have any questions, please ask in the chat.
Thanks so much. And thanks for rolling with the technical difficulties. We're all still learning this sort of new interaction framework. So everybody, for the next presentation, if you could raise your hand and I will unmute you. And the presenter, if you could share your screen, you're a co-host. Okay, so unmute.
Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. Atif will be sharing the screen.
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
I've shared it. Can you guys see it?
Yes, I can just see your background. Oops. There we go.
Okay,
I can see it. Wait, I'm still trying to unmute a few people for you.
I'll be starting. So
everybody should be unmuted who is going to be speaking, and let me know in the chat window if that's not true. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Go right ahead.
Okay, so hello everyone. I hope you guys are staying safe. So let me start by thanking first of all our organizers, speakers, and participants for this amazing workshop. You guys are doing really an amazing job. I am Mubashir and our team is COVID Busters. The title of our project is Effect of Migration with Heterogeneous Prevention Measures Using an Agent-Based Model. So next slide, please, Atif. Atif. I'm sorry.
The next slide didn't go up.
I've changed it. There's some lag, I guess.
There could be a difference. I had this problem myself once and it didn't go forward. There you go. There it is. Great.
All right. This is okay. Yeah. So some time ago, India saw a nationwide lockdown which left millions of migrant workers stranded without food and supplies. So they started migrating from bigger cities to villages and all over the country. So this was pretty much what we had in our minds when we started. And as we moved on, we thought of incorporating the effect of heterogeneity in terms of lockdown measures and hygiene habits of different cities. Some of the research questions that we would like to answer with our project is how the positioning and working hours of hubs like supermarkets and essential services be, so that the minimization of the spread can be done, to find the possibility of controlled migration if there is any, and also to see the effect of heterogeneity in size of families in the spread. Yeah, okay, so we did some research on the work that has already been done, and we found that the trend was that they have been trying to model the spread either in a region using methods like ABM, or trying to see the effect of heterogeneity in a population. So what we are trying to do in our project is to kind of bring to all those things together and see the heterogeneity across cities and the presence of central locations and their effects on spread while migration is going on. So Atif will take this from here.
Yeah, thank you, Mubashir. So let's talk about our model first. In our model, we use the citizens of each city as agent, and we simulate travel using using two ways. So first way is a 2D random walk. So it's a random movement of agents, and the other way Owen will soon talk about. So in this simulation, you can see the red dots represent the infected individuals, the blue dots represent the susceptible, and the green represents the removed population. initially each dot was randomly distributed, and they perform a 2D walk across the city, which is represented by this window. I have incorporated this slide from YY's presentation, which shows the ring structure of spread across the network of disease, which can be seen in our model. So now let's talk about migration. In this model, in this simulation, we had 4 cities, and randomly a group of individuals, a definite group of individuals were traveling from one city to the other. As Sam said in the presentation today, a seeding problem. So what we saw in the simulation is that once the migration is turned on, the spread is faster. And soon we get to see more hotspots like these. So if there are more hotspots appearing across the cities, it quickly covers the whole city. If there was no migration, the spread is less. So what we thought of doing was, we want to look at the effect of intercity lockdown. So intercity lockdown means we stop the migration of people across the city at one time step that we define here as T0. So if I stop my lockdown, so if I choose my T0 as small, the lockdown stops earlier. And what we see is the peak, the y-axis shows the peak of the infected population. It's smaller than if my lockdown is in effect after, it's in effect for later. So the peak increases as my T0 increases, which is also can be seen in these SIR curves. What we need to understand as well is these are stochastic models, and perhaps to better get these results, if we had time, we should have ran these simulations for like a bajillion times and taken average. But in a week time, that this is what we get. So what we can see is as T0 goes from 10 to 20 to 30 and 50, the infected population size increases, this blue curve, and slowly the whole city is infected. So I'll give it to Owen to talk about preferential movement model now.
Sure. Yeah, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah, I've done it.
Okay, cool. So kind of the direction we want to take this now is, instead of making the agents move randomly throughout space, we'd like to define home locations, workplaces, like transit hubs and marketplaces for each agent, and have them move kind of between those 4 or 5 different locations preferentially. So what this means is we define movement policies that define probabilities that agents stay at home, go to the workplace, go to a market, or go like to their public transport locations. And then at each time step, they move kind of following those probabilities instead of just following a random walk. So go to the next slide. Cool, so this is like kind of some initial results from that. This part of the model is still kind of under development, but you can kind of see from the difference between these 2 curves that applying a kind of movement probabilities policy that forces agents to stay home more frequently kind of flattens out the infection curve in blue there from a model that has kind of more even distribution of movements. And one of the interesting things about this is that we tried to assign agents to these locations in kind of a way that made them a little bit more or less important. So with a home, we kind of made it so maybe there's like only 3 or 4 agents per home location. But with a work location, maybe there's like 20 to 30 agents. And for a market, maybe there's like 50 to 100. And for a transit, maybe it's even larger. So they're kind of like distributed inversely proportional to how many agents there are using each one. And this, we kind of learned that this opens up our model for kind of more exploration towards what it might be like to live in like large households or something. So if you go to the next slide. Is it gonna come up?
Just a reminder, there's 2 minutes to the end of your 10
Yeah, actually, just go from this to the 2 more. these are kind of just more models that show a similar effect of the working from home stuff. But the next slide, if I can see it, it's lagging for me, basically talks about some of the stuff we want to do in the future with this model. So the thing I was just talking about is that last point where if you have heterogeneous family sizes, like staying home might not really be the best solution for epidemic prevention, because like you could have one individual in the family who goes to work, they encounter their population at work, bring it back to like a family unit of like 10 or 12, and then suddenly that family unit of 10 or 12 becomes a little hub for infection. And if any of them leave, then they're spreading it again. So it's kind of like physical isolation and quarantine of an infected population might work in a world where everyone kind of lives by themselves, but depending on the different kinds of family sizes, it might not always be the solution. So we're going to probably expand our model to explore more effects like that, and also more social distancing effects, because we have it kind of built in but not active right now. So we might just sort of turn that on and start seeing what happens. Yeah, Atiyab or Mubashir, do you have anything else to talk about for our future plans?
I guess you pretty much summed it all.
Yeah, I guess we can also incorporate the migration into the preferential movement model as well. So
yeah.
That is another future plan.
Yeah, so maybe it'll be like when you visit the transit hub, you migrate, and so that still is kind of probability dictated.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks to our final presentation group, and thanks to everyone.